This week on To the Contrary,
more ramifications from the leaked Supreme Court decision that would, if handed down in that form, annihilate abortion rights. The ripple effects on large businesses, the Catholic Church, and even in vitro fertilization are vast. Then, could the baby formula crisis have been averted if more women worked in that industry?
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. This week, collateral consequences.
Reproductive rights organizations, anti-abortion rights organizations, private employers, religious institutions, clinics, state governments, and others are figuring out how they will operate after the likely Supreme Court reversal of Roe v. Wade. Oklahoma passed a bill that would effectively ban all abortions. Depending on how the decision is written, it could impact in vitro fertilization, or IVF, a medical procedure used by couples wanting to have babies. Experts warn that it's unclear if the procedure would remain legal and what will be done with unused embryos under certain laws, such as Oklahoma's. Meanwhile, employers who provide abortion care benefits for workers face challenges in fulfilling their promises to employees. That's because certain state laws could open up lawsuits against anyone who facilitates an abortion. Religious organizations, some who have intensely lobbied against abortion, are also adapting to a post-Roe world. The Catholic Church has already stated it opposes all abortions, but it does not support criminalizing women who have them. And an archbishop in San Francisco got involved in the political debate, this time denying House Speaker Nancy Pelosi communion for her stance on abortion. Joining me today are Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, D.C. delegate, former GOP House member Nan Hayworth, Debra Carnahan, former judge and prosecutor, and Amala Ekpunobi, podcast host for PragerU.
Delegate Holmes Norton, so what about these women who are stocking up on so-called chemical abortions, medical abortions, medication abortions, RU486 and Plan B? Are they going to be sought out and prosecuted for having those drugs, those legal drugs in their homes if they live in states such as Oklahoma or Mississippi?
First of all, it's going to be very hard to discover who they are, much less what they are doing. There are so many ways to engage in abortion today. Science has become so far that I think it's much too late to stop all abortions from occurring.
Yes, and so-called medication abortions are now account for slightly more than half of all abortions. But what about companies that promise to pay for travel and the medical expenses of having an abortion in another state for their female employees? What's going to happen to them?
It's going to go state by state again, right? Because if we lose our federal protection, it's back to the states. And the more conservative right-wing states like Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, I think you could see heavy fines on corporations that continue to offer that benefit. I also think you'll see some corporations leave those states.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I feel as though some of these corporations will leave. You have corporations like Tesla in Texas who have said, I will fund and help and support female employees who want to cross state lines in order to do this. And you might see companies like Tesla leave Texas. I happen to represent the more pro-life aspect of this argument, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a choice for these companies in these states. I've also read a little bit about Congress being able to weigh on this and actually create protections for women who want to leave the state that they are a resident in order to receive an abortion, and say that the states should not be able to prohibit them from doing that.
Companies and their lawyers, their legal counsel's office, are going to have to possibly subject themselves to a whole lot of trouble, pull out of some potentially very profitable states, or have some national rule. How could this possibly be navigated through Congress, former Representative Hayworth?
I think it would be very difficult on the Senate side. I think on the House side, the Democratic members would probably pass a law that would limit states' abilities to penalize companies that participate in that kind of activity, or specifically to legislate protections, because then the nature of the protections would be obviously something that would have to be discussed. But I think, the whole point of what we've been dealing with is that these matters do return to the states. So I think the appetite on the Senate to pass among the Senate, Republicans plus Manchin would be not there to interfere or intervene from the national level.
Amala, what do you think about the Catholic Church saying that it totally opposes abortion, but doesn't want to criminalize women who have abortions?
I imagine that's how many people on the conservative end of things feel. I represent an a-religious conservative, so I don't keep up too much with the practices of the Catholic Church. But I don't think that anybody really wants to see women persecuted. Maybe people on the very far extreme right wants to see women persecuted for going and trying to receive this procedure. But at the end of the day, I think what we want in this post-Roe America is states being able to decide we don't want to see women prosecuted for making what is a very rough and horrific decision, I think, for anybody involved. We want to see people who are carrying out these procedures illegally be the ones who bear the burden of this sort of legislation. So I think many people will support that, at least on the pro-life end of the scale.
On the pro-life end, right. But how about voters in the middle Eleanor, who do they see it as any more palatable politically to prosecute doctors, many of whom now, many OB-GYNs are women who are just trying to help other women get their reproductive health services?
You ask about voters in the middle, and that is where most voters are, in the middle. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why it's going to be very difficult for these measures that attempt to bar abortion altogether to succeed. First of all, you're going to have half the states where abortion is legal. And that's going to mean women going to take advantage of abortion when they need abortion.
Have you heard from companies that are planning to pull out of certain states, red states like Texas, like Oklahoma, where the most severe anti-abortion laws will be passed or have already been passed and will take effect, and how they're dealing with that in terms of the bottom line that they have to pull out of states that might be profitable to them?
Oh, that is certainly having an effect on states, southern states or states like Texas, who see that taking extreme measures is having an effect far beyond abortion on matters that mean the most to them, like the business climate.
I'm so tired of, we're not going to hurt women. I mean, it's the same thing as, Roe v. Wade's never going to be overturned. Abortion's never going to be made legal. Yeah, there are going to be states where they are going to lock women up. they will be prosecuted. And if the district attorney in some city like St. Louis, which is a blue city, will not prosecute women for having an abortion, the attorney general, who is a right-winged, pro-life Republican running for the U.S. Senate, he will take over and he will prosecute women. So when I hear, oh, we don't want to see women in jail, I don't believe it. And I don't think that's the case. They're going to punish women and make an example of women that get illegal abortions.
I heard one leader of an organization that runs crisis pregnancy centers say that assuming this decision is what's handed down and it's not softened up at all, which is still a possibility, that they're going to open up 5 times as many of those crisis pregnancy clinics as they have now and do more to reach out to women. Should they be regulated if they do that, to say exactly how much financial assistance they give women, that everything, it's really just blankets and food and things like that, and counseling, but it all stops when the child is born.
But that also goes state to state, depending on their state health departments. And then, of course, in terms of caring for children once born, whether or not, they were born because a mother decided not to perform an abortion that she might have otherwise done, or for any other way, that's a separate system. So I don't think that would particularly play into what crisis pregnancy centers do.
So do you think that moderate Catholics in red states like yours, Missouri, are going to turn against the Catholic Church if it says to them, you can't have IVF done, you can't create children if you're part of an infertile couple?
I'm not Catholic, but I have a lot of Catholic friends, and it's a big Catholic city. Some people will leave the church, but I think most of them will stay with their church, and they'll go ahead and go somewhere else to have the procedure done, just like they've done with abortion.
How do you think it'll play politically?
Well, I'm hoping that politically that women and men are going to get out there and we're going to vote in huge numbers against anybody that is trying to shut down our reproductive rights and control the bodies of women.
I would imagine that there are lines that need to be drawn. I don't think the vast majority of voters are in support of something like banning IVF, although some of them might be on the pro-life end of the spectrum. So I imagine we're going to start having conversations with the people, our elected officials who are going to be making these decisions, about where the lines in the sand are going to be. I'm a pro-lifer who by no means would support a ban on in vitro fertilization. I think that is a tool and a procedure that many couples need in order to bear children. And I would never want to see a world or a state where that was taken away as a choice. At the end of the day, I think Roe v. Wade it was not a super precedent. There's not widespread agreement on this. There's not a lot of historical or constitutional backing for this. And much of this draft opinion that was written relied on the writings of actually liberal law professors who said, even though I am pro-choice and I think that's where my state should land on this legislation, Roe v. Wade does not have the constitutional backing to be a decision made by the Supreme Court and thusly should be put in the hands of the states. And I think that's where we're at. We need to start talking about ramifications and the different routes that this can take in different states. But those are discussions that we as constituents should be able to have with our elected representatives.
Okay, but I'm curious, Amala, whether there's a generational divide among young conservatives and old conservatives on this issue, on IVF, and whether it should be banned. And it's not just, I should say, it's not just the Catholic Church that sees it as, that it should be banned. There are also evangelical churches that think it should be banned.
Yeah, I think maybe more so than a generational problem, this is going to be sort of how much religiosity are we allowing to come into this argument. I'm not having conversations with any conservatives today, and feel free to point them out to me, that are saying that IVF should be banned in any state, and even in very pro-life leaning states. I would love to sit down and have these discussions. And I think, again, like I said before, that's what needs to happen in the wake of this draft opinion being leaked. Very detailed, pointed discussions about what this means legislatively for each state.
Nan, closing out with you. Do you think the Archbishop of San Francisco should have come out and said that he would deny communion to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi? Good move or bad move?
The Catholic Church has a strict hierarchical organization, and it is entirely within the purview of the Archbishop to deny the sacrament to any of his parishioners. He has exercised that prerogative. Clearly, it is a strong political statement. Certainly, he did something that he is allowed to do, and it's probably not the first time he's done it.
But Bonnie, the speaker, I believe, has already received communion here in Georgetown in the District of Columbia.
There you go.
Or I'm sure, as the former head of Catholics for Choice told me years ago, she would just sneak into churches, with a scarf on or something covering part of her face, and take communion when the priest didn't know who she was. She was just somebody who showed up for mass.
That said, what practicing Catholics, what Catholics will tell you is that sneaking into communion does not negate the fact that the message the Archbishop was seeking to send doctrinally was that the speaker's position, her advocacy, puts her own soul at risk. I'm not saying that that's my position, but that's what he is conveying.
Right, exactly. Okay. From reproductive rights to the shortage of baby formula.
Mothers across the country are struggling to find infant formula for their babies. That despite urgent shipments of formula flown in this week from Europe. It's needed to fill the gigantic void left by the closure of Abbott Nutrition's production plant more than 3 months ago. 2 babies died from bacterial infections caused by sanitation issues at that plant. Most impacted are babies allergic to cow's milk. Hearings were held in the House this week, focusing on securing formula for mothers and babies who need it and making sure this doesn't happen again. Food experts believe it's important to increase the number of women in the food tech industry. Of the 4 main baby formula companies, Abbott, Reckitt, Nestle, and Perrigo, there is not one woman CEO. Although the shortage is the fault of Abbott and poor planning by the FDA, gender bias in the industry could also be to blame. There have been no real advances in baby formula for dozens of years.
So, Debra Carnahan, if there were one or more female CEOs of these companies, would we be in the terrible situation that we're in right now?
I don't think so, Bonnie. I think history has shown when there are more women involved in women's issues, there's more protection for women. There's more concern about women's issues. So I think that, there's a great chance that the sanitation issues and violations may not have occurred to the degree that they did.
I disagree on that point. I don't think it's about the gender of the person who's sitting at the top, the head of the table. It's about competency. And clearly there was a lack of competency, a lack of regulation, people looking into the sanitation of these factories. I don't think having female organs at the top of the table changes the way that this plays out at all.
I've raised 2 babies with my male counterpart. My dad was an incredible parent to me, along with my mom, and they both care. Moms and dads, parents of all genders care about their kids. And in fact, if we're going that route, really the pediatric profession and the OBGYN profession are heavily populated. In fact, OBGYN is pretty much dominated by female physicians now. And, so these are areas that certainly intersect with the baby formula industry. So, no one facilitated a swifter solution who might have been, we would hope in the fullness of time, retrospectively able to do so. But I don't think it has to do with gender. I agree with Amala.
Yeah, but no matter how great men are as parents these days, and more of them are incredible parents. They still don't lactate. This wouldn't be the first thing that would come to their mind about a shortage, I should think, particularly in this situation.
But Bonnie, with all due respect, it's the non-lactators who need the formula. The lactators don't.
What we're really talking about is sanitation issues. And they were aware of these issues, and they continued to fight, and they continued to produce them. And, they were aware of these issues, and they did not correct them in a timely fashion. I actually do think a woman would be more concerned about the sanitation of baby formula. I just do. And, all things being equal. And instead, they put profit above safety.
There are lots and lots of ways in which the economics of baby formula, its production and its sale, have been distorted. And a lot of it is due to bureaucracies. It's not entirely due to that, but a lot of it is, including the women, infants, and children, federal and state programs, and trade policy.
Absolutely.
Neither of which have to do with male executives.
I was shocked by the fact that there were so few companies. 75% of babies need this formula, and I was amazed that given how universal is the need, that you have a virtual monopoly with 2 or 3 companies responsible for the entire country. So we've had to go outside of the country.
President used the defense law, the same one he used at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, to open up gas reserves and oil reserves. He used that law now to stop the companies that are producing it from shipping it over to Europe. So will that ease? Is it already beginning to ease the shortage?
It is starting to ease, but also the FDA has seized a lot of the infant formula that's being shipped in from Europe, saying that because it doesn't have English labeling or it doesn't have the American standardized scoop size in the bottle, that they can't go and give this formula to American mothers. It seems like there's a lot of blunders here all across the chain. Not only that 4 companies seemingly control all of the infant formula, we haven't allowed European imports of formula, even though their formula has made much more progress in ingredients and moving forward to be healthier for babies than Americans has. So it seems like these companies sort of have a stronghold on the market here, and it's something that we haven't addressed until it became lethal for our children.
I agree with Amala, and actually, apropos of your point, Debbie, there's a paternalistic attitude on the part of government that has limited the choices of moms. And the best thing we could do is give moms in the WIC program vouchers to use for the formula they choose and open up the marketplace.
Well, I definitely agree with several points that were just made. And it is amazing how few companies are making formula. I actually can see not passing on formula that doesn't have English labeling and it doesn't have instructions on how to use it, that moms and dads wouldn't be able to understand it. So I can see why there was some caution there with the FDA. And, once again, I think the estimates are in 3 weeks, it should be good again, and we should be back up to where we should be. But also let's talk about the pandemic and that people were storing the baby formula. And so there's a whole supply demand thing that went on for the companies. So a lot of factors came to fruition together to create this situation.
We interviewed the head of the Vegan Women's Summit this week, and she said there have been no advances. And when you think about all the advances with cloned meat and what God knows what have you, there have been no advances with baby formula in 60 years. Is that not something that a woman, had she been a CEO had there been a female CEO of 1 or 2 of these companies, would have let it fall so far behind the rest of the food system?
Baby formulas have been changing even in the past couple of decades. I know that.
And even more so than gender, again, it goes back to this 4-company oligopoly that we have now on baby formula. If you have 4 companies that have a strong hold on creating baby formula and selling it to the American people, what incentive do they have to improve? They've got the stronghold on the market. They don't have to do anything. There's no viable competition because no other smaller businesses are coming up in the ranks creating baby formula. I think this is an issue of bureaucracy more so than it has ever been an issue about gender. We all care about babies. We all want them to live and be healthy, but corporations care about profit.
And that's okay. An honest profit is a good thing. If you've earned it honestly. Our problem is excessive government action and interference in markets.
The basic problem is you have a virtual monopoly. If you didn't have 2 or 3 companies responsible for such a product that is like water, you can't do without, we wouldn't be in this position. So we need to, after this crisis, take a real look at our antitrust laws.
But for the FDA going into Abbott, these horrible, unsanitary practices that threatens babies' lives and have killed babies, would not have been discovered. And the wonderful corporate profit is great mentality, would keep going on. But, it's not excessive government regulation that caused this to happen.
All right. Thank you all for this enlightening discussion. That's it for this edition. Let's keep talking on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And visit our PBS website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.